Hey, I'm Dr. Gwen, and my channel is all about creating content that empowers the neurodiverse community. In this episode, I get to have a passionate conversation with Andrew Brucker, who's a neurodivergent therapist, about self diagnosis and the importance of knowing and being who you are. If you're questioning if you're autistic, this episode may be for you. Welcome to the show. I am so excited to welcome Andrew Brucker, therapist extraordinaire. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Hi, Gwen. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, as with our community, a lovely person in our community connected me to you, and she's lovely. And I think
Yeah,
automatically, I'm like, well, if she loves you, then there's a reason why.
she's great.
And
She really is.
She really is. And so you were so kind to just give time for us to connect. And then after we connected, you were also so kind to say, yeah, I'll come on the show to talk about self diagnosis. And,
Yeah,
right, self diagnosis is something that has come up quite a bit in our community. And kind of the pros and cons of, whether you self diagnose or if you need a formal diagnosis. And we can talk about that. But you were so generous with just the entertaining the thought of sharing your journey of self-diagnosis. So,
yeah, yeah. And it's something that I think about a lot because something like this, I wouldn't have been comfortable with. I mean, who's comfortable with public speaking? But I think that as I've continued in my journey here, and through self-diagnosis and my own, exploration into the neurodivergent space, it has become something that I'm more and more excited to do, and like happy to do, not something that I'm just like scared of. So yeah,
yeah, and maybe, for those people in the audience who are even questioning how they work, if this resonates
yeah,
with you, what I'm hoping is that it gives you um a space to think about yourself for self-reflection and maybe some like kind of actionable things that you can take, some actions you can take if it does resonate with you. So maybe like let's go back to the beginning, Andrew, right? Like let's
yeah.
go back. But so talk to us about how the journey of self-diagnosis even started for you.
Yeah, so for me, I've been diagnosed with ADHD since I was 5. So I have gotten accommodations through that. I had an IEP. Things kind of made sense for me for the first like 16 or 17 years that I had ADHD. I had some anxiety. When I was 17, it headed towards depression, but everything seemed kind of in line. I mean, I knew that I had some sensory issues. I knew that, that kind of could come along with ADHD, but, it just really, what seems to happen for a lot of people who don't know that they're autistic is that there's a strong sense of anxiety that doesn't necessarily fit with, and here's something that's really interesting that a lot of people in the space talk about is that for people with general anxiety, they go through a process of habituation whereby you become desensitized to a stimulus and you experience less anxiety over time. Now in the neurodivergent or autistic brain, that doesn't happen like that. So um, the more you are exposed to a stimulus, the more anxiety you get, and the more it ramps up. So it doesn't lessen over time. So it just doesn't work the same way. So, sometimes people don't understand that. They don't know that maybe that's why I'm just still not getting it. I was doing a paper in undergrad, and I wrote it on myself. It was in a child psychopathology course, and you had to do a case study. You had to create a case study, and I did it on myself, and I came across some details in my own, like looking back and asking my mom about different assessments that I had. Some interesting details that, like when I was 3 or 4, at preschool, they called my mom to let her know that, like, I was, and this was in a report, that I was, hiding under a table, crying because I couldn't communicate. I didn't know how to communicate with my peers, and I was like 3 or 4. Like, I didn't find this out until I was like 20, 21. And it's interesting things like that, like, when you start to question the way that you relate to other people, and you start to wonder, like, I've never really understood, like, what is it of how I connect that is different than, other people, that you start to wonder, like, what is going on here? Is this anxiety? Is this something else? I knew at that point that there was so much carryover between autism and ADHD, that, there's room for both. There's room for little bits of each one, but, for me, I started to really kind of look at, what else was there, what else was going on. I, as a kid, I would cling on to one or two people. I was in a friend group where I was really fighting for attention. I was, it's so interesting that now when you think back, I made a fool of myself a lot, because I knew that it was the one way to get attention was if I, made fun of myself, if I was self-deprecating, if I really, like, brought, amped up the parts of me that wanted to put on a show, that wanted to perform, that, I was bullied a lot. But it was by the people that I was seeking attention from. So I would make a fool of myself because it got attention. And I was a class clown because it got attention. And I found myself, sometimes being mean at at the expense of getting attention from the people that would vilify me. But um, it was attention, and I wanted attention. I wanted the attention so badly. It wasn't till I was 16 that I really started to distance myself from those people, and I started to find my own quirky community of people that also didn't particularly fit in. So I really started to understand. I learned. I lost a friend to suicide in high school, and one of the most important things that he taught me was, don't settle. Don't settle in your relationships. Don't settle in life for what we think we can have because of the expectations that we are afraid to set for ourselves. Um, it it became so scary, the idea of what I wanted or thought people wanted for me, that I was really afraid to find out who I was. I was afraid to find out what I was actually capable of. Um, One thing that's really important to know about being neurodivergent is that, and especially, having ADHD or being autistic, is that, and especially if both, is that, like, that, like, there's some things you're really good at, and you can hyper focus on things you're really interested in. I mean, we go in and out of hobbies every couple months. But some things you really stick with, and what some people may call our special interests, or are really deep passions. And if you can find those and do that as a job, you will love going to work. I love going to work because I get to do what I love all day. Now, I also love scanning numbers. I love puzzles. I could probably be a decent accountant. My wife's an accountant. And I love when she's like, think I'm missing something here. I love to scan numbers. But would that be something that I enjoy doing every day? For some people, yes, because you don't have to talk to people. And I encourage you, if you think I really don't love face to face contact, I encourage you, if you're good at scanning numbers, become an accountant. You look into forensic accounting, you scan numbers all day, and it feels great to find the errors, so I think that's fantastic. But I love talking one on one. I don't love talking in crowds, but and I don't love groups of new people, but I love talking one on one. And I found that to be not only so rewarding, but so it just felt so comfortable that throughout my journey, seeing also what that could do, um, really empowered me to be in this space. And that took me to more the last several months where I've really come into this space as a neurodivergent therapist. Um, you know, and there's so much more on that, but yeah, that's kind of where my journey began, in kind of trying to understand myself, um and where I fit in. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's so cool, Andrew, is that you used a structured assignment
Yeah.
to, right, as a frame to understand yourself at that time, right? What
Yeah.
a great way to engage in that kind of self-reflection and identity kind of process. I think whenever I'm working with a young person, when I say young person, I mean I work with teens and adults.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the framework and specific questions and providing reflection or a way to think about something or answering certain questions seems very helpful in understanding who you are with more words, or with more organized words. How do I conceptualize myself? And it's a time of identity formation as it is, like just developmentally.
Yeah.
So I love that you used that assignment, child psychopathology, at that to say, wait a minute, like I'm going to use myself as a case.
Yeah, I didn't actually know. I mean, I was starting to lean into some areas of things, but I don't think that I quite got it until I started to actually dig deeper into
Yeah.
my childhood and what was, written, what was in my mom's mind, what was written on paper, and in reports. Because I mean, I was assessed multiple times, and I had the benefit of, I would say even in some ways the luxury of being able to be assessed, and we'll talk about that when we get into
Yeah.
why self-diagnosis is so important. But I luckily had the knowledge, well, and pool to pull from, that helped me really explore those younger parts of myself better than, give a neurodivergent person structure, and they'll flourish. So,
Yeah.
clear and explicit, instructions, and we can run with it. So yeah.
Well, let's go there. I mean, that's where your
Yeah.
mind went. Why is self-diagnosis in your mind so critical or so important?
So let me give you like a little snapshot of, and I, for especially for anybody who's watching this, or listening to this. So if you want to get diagnosed with ADHD as a child, a young adult, an average diagnosis may cost around 2,000. And this is a formal assessment. This is a formal assessment that will help you receive accommodations, a 504 plan, an IEP. That's just for ADHD. Now, when you want a formal assessment for autism, it starts between 2 and 3,000. Very infrequently, you may find a place that takes insurance. It's very hard, and they will have a very long wait list. Um, but the average cost is anywhere between 2 to 3,000 and 12,000. So I know doctors who charge $12,000 for an assessment. And I mean, this is the thing. You're talking about 30 to 40 hours of these people's time, in which they interview you, they interview your family, they interview you over and over again. They have you answer questions, they have you fill out forms, they go through pictures, they have you identify, pictures and emotions that you are understanding from the pictures. And it is an at length process that is dubious. It is very intense, and is a huge barrier to most of the population that needs to be diagnosed. Now, we talk about kids getting diagnosed, we talk about adults being diagnosed. So the barrier is that the purpose of a formal assessment is really and should be for accommodations, because I think that everybody should have the luxury of being able to be formally assessed, but it's not possible. And it's so important for kids to do it because um, when you get into preschool, when you start to get into grade school, and you start to get into the upper years in junior high and high school, and you get into the beginning of college, those assessments follow you. So the sooner you get it, the better. Now, some people, okay, you talk about autism as a spectrum. Some people, as soon as they hit 2 years old, you start to see milestones that they're missing. Okay, those are the more prevalent autistics, the more, the higher support need autistics that, get caught early, and that's really important. But then you start to see people like me, or people, who don't find out until they're adults, that really passed under the radar because they learn to mask, they learn to really adapt in ways that maybe aren't like most neurotypicals, but it worked for them, that they could hide themselves enough that they passed. They passed off as, neurotypical enough. They passed off as not needing more support. And the problem with that is that all the time that we lost understanding ourselves, maybe there was more accommodations that we could have benefited from. But you want to talk about this from an identity crisis standpoint. I really started to own my diagnosis really between 20 to 30. But had I really understood it at the age of 5 to 10, I'm sure, I don't even know where that could have brought me or what that could have done for me. I mean, maybe it wouldn't have kept me being bullied for so long. Who knows? But, you know, the barrier to assessment and diagnosis is so high that um, all you're left with is self diagnosis. And that is so important because, some people say that, oh, well, self-diagnosing we shouldn't do that because it takes away from the importance of a formal assessment, or it takes away from, you know, some people will say, well, we'd rather you self-diagnose because we don't want to take away resources from the people who really need it. Well, there was a time when we understood autistics as white males, and only white males, and affluent white males who can afford an assessment. So, that leaves out, 75% of the population. That leaves out the growing population of, you know, people that are starting to understand themselves from a different point of view, because we're starting to accept the idea of being autistic and accept the idea of being neurodivergent. Um, so much more, in a general space. Now in some schools we have sensory rooms, we have therapy classrooms that are not support need classrooms, but are classrooms that have less, sit in your seat, very rigid rules. And you can't stim, you can't, there's such, ideas that we have of the neurotypical classroom. And then we have what are now therapy classrooms that are rooms for people who are not even diagnosed, but they're rooms for people who need a little bit less structured learning. Um, and it's funny because I say that, autistics need a lot of structure, but they need a lot of less rigid kind of, structure that somebody who can sit still for an hour at a time, 7 hours a day, that is very tough for somebody who um, is autistic or ADHD. Um, I don't think that I took in a lot of information from the time that I was 7 to 18. I mean, like I learned and I loved certain things. I loved math, but I didn't know what was the best way to learn for myself, because even though I was diagnosed as ADHD, I was still set off by so many different things around the room, that sensory wise, I mean, I didn't know. So there's just such a barrier to formal assessment that it really deters a lot of families and deters a lot of people from ever knowing who they are,
Yeah.
and that's problematic.
It is problem. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what, that's what causes and distress and suffering. Um, and that I think the other piece too that can baffle me sometimes is identity evolves. So just because
Right,
you might identify as ADHD as a kiddo, right? And that was a formal diagnosis
right,
derived from formal testing. Adding an autism label, adding that piece as you've evolved and get to know yourself and have some life experience and learn more about, oh my gosh, like this kind of resonates with me, this diagnostic kind of category, right? Um, that identity can change. And actually, identity does change throughout life. And so I think sometimes there's this kind of backlash with like, no, you can't be autistic now. You're an adult. You
right,
can't be autistic now,
right,
right?
right. You weren't autistic then. You can't be
No,
autistic now. Like,
right.
which is, that's another thing, is that, like, how many people actually have access to the wealth of knowledge of their childhood, either on paper or from the, I mean, a lot of the times, we talk about, you know I would say chosen family, because our given family is not always, when we grow up feeling different or feeling other, um, we don't always, as we get older, we don't always stick with our given family, and even our given family doesn't have the best recollection of what it was like for us when we were younger, because you got to think about it. If somebody, you know a parent is not accepting of autism, is not going to remember or want to remember any pieces of their child's childhood that were different, that might have been signals, because no, my kid, at the same time, a lot of these parents are autistic and they
Yeah.
don't know it. And there's a lot of projection, there's a lot of rejection of the self there, that, well, they can't be autistic because what that would might mean that I'm autistic.
Yeah.
And like there's such a fight against what might happen if you had to accept that your child was autistic, to then, I mean, it's funny, when people find out that, like, it's heritable, it's like, like, it's a greater than 50% chance that if you have ADHD or you're autistic, that your child will have ADHD, or and or be autistic. Like, it's extremely heritable, and
Mhm.
we never know to what degree. But I mean, there's some of the most heritable, neurodevelopmental disorders that we classify, that we look at, and people don't ever just wander into an autism diagnosis by chance, as much as they struggle through immense depression and anxiety, over things that are beyond their control, that they don't understand, for so long. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people who come to me that um, don't know that they have ADHD, but they've been struggling for so long, not able to put their life together, with anxiety and depression, that, like, they think that the problem is anxiety and depression, where that's actually just a symptom
Yeah.
of a mind that doesn't understand itself, that has never been appropriately um, diagnosed or treated, that never got the care it needed.
Hmm.
So many people that diagnosed later on in life are like, oh my God, how my life would have been different had I known. And, well, we know we can't turn the clocks back. So what do we do now? And I think that barrier, that, well, I also know people who, they try to go to a psychiatrist, or they try to go get assessed, and they come back and they say, well, they say that I wasn't autistic enough, or I
Enough.
wasn't
Enough.
enough, or
Enough. Yeah.
I didn't quite fit. My childhood wasn't as different, or I couldn't really, I read the pictures too well. I mean, it's you know our good friend, she, will say that I can look at the way that you walk, I can look at the way you talk, I can look at the way you carry yourself, and have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And I believe that that's very true because, I don't feel like it takes me very long in a room to figure out, when people are not understanding somebody, to see that they're probably neurodivergent. I mean, they're like, I can tell, but it's so interesting how we explain away somebody's, qualities, and why they're different, instead of being like, well, what if they were autistic, or what if they had ADHD? Because some people will be like, well, everybody has a little ADHD, or everybody's a little autistic, and it's like, has your life been affected by these things? Because if it has, there's probably a good chance that you are autistic. And we just, the archaic way that we diagnose autism is, it's so outdated in the way that we look at it in the DSM, that if you didn't fit a repetitive stereotyped movement, or
Yeah.
that, like, that you won't be considered autistic, and or that you read the emotions too well. And I hate to tell you, but that is not the only thing that says that you're autistic, or that can really show that you're autistic. And it's really tough because you get denied and denied and denied for so much of life, and that, well, you give up on ever really understanding yourself. That I feel for people who are not finding out until they're in their 40s or 50s,
Hmm.
that, hey, like, what is going on here? Like, how, so, um, yeah, I mean, it's such a challenge.
Yeah. And, there's the big, some of the like kind of meta parts of this that are so resonant for me as I support, like, I'm neurotypical and I support the neurodiverse community with full disclosure that I'm neurotypical. And yeah, do I
Right.
have some of those pieces of like ADHD and that? Yeah. But uh, that hasn't impacted my life in a way that I have not understood. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Or have
Right.
like have kind of integrated into the way I am. But I think, I love this idea of, instead of pathologizing or denying or diminishing or dismissing, how do we say, wow, when we're anxious about something, it's a signal that
Yeah.
there's something important to us that we're not fully grasping or have not articulated, or that we're really worried about. There's something really important to us, right? How can we look at anxiety and even depression in those ways of, this is an adaptive kind of response? And I think, the while the pro of formal diagnosis, and I do appreciate, because you're not exaggerating. I mean, I really hope the audience doesn't think you're exaggerating about the cost of an assessment, because Andrew
Mm-hmm.
is right on in the range. Um, yeah, when you need to navigate our archaic systems of support, whether that's through health insurance or through IEP structures or legal structures, yes, that formal diagnosis is necessary to navigate and obtain access to those supports, which we could even argue are not always you might be awarded them, but you may not get them. So there's that piece there. But in regards to self-diagnosis, I love this idea of like not settling. Like, don't give up on
Yeah.
yourself. You know, um, continue to explore and find answers. Like, don't give up on that piece. I'm curious, Andrew, like what tipped you off into autism? What was that point where you're like, holy cow?
Yeah, I mean, well, I will say, I will add that even if you get diagnosed and then go for accommodations, a
Uh-huh.
huge problem, and I know we won't have time to get into this, but ABA. So it's when in the neurodivergent community, that is a bad word. That is a bad acronym. It's a bad word because what we talk about is compliance.
Yes.
Parents like it, kids are traumatized by it. So most school systems and I'll try to keep this short, but I and many of us in the community, and especially our friend, Dr. Budding, feels very strongly about, is that ABA is very traumatic. It is a form of, if you can get accommodations, well, this is the accommodations that most public schools provide. This is what we can provide, is that we will write up IEPs that have them comply with certain behaviors and reward them for less outward behaviors, less things that may get in the way of learning for someone else, or may, are stimming. We will reduce stimming. We will reduce, the visage of, the visual that someone is autistic. And it's it's rather disgusting, but it's actually mostly what the only thing that's available. So that's a topic for another day. But I will say that even if you can get diagnosed, you have to be really careful, because you will be fighting your district, you'll be fighting the teachers. They will text you and say, well, we really need you to work on this at home. And you'll look at this and be like, why does my kid have to do this? Why are they being asked to, get gold stars and lessen their appearance of, and I told them they had to sit and stay doing this when they were flipping out. And it's like, did you clearly, we're not paying attention to the fact that the kid was distressed, very distressed. And you said, no, sit here and do it. You're completely denying a kid's needs. So let's put that aside for a second, because we don't have time for that. But that is very scary, and that is definitely something that, and I'm sure you've talked about it before, that can't be ignored. But for me, something that I've always had a sweet tooth. I've always considered myself, and I put it on my website, as a snack connoisseur. So what that means to me is that as a kid, I always, and I never understood this till I was older, I always carried around candy, and I always carried around snacks. Now, what's interesting is that I, for the most part, did not consume these snacks or this candy. Now, maybe I did sometimes, but I was the kid that everybody knew had snacks. If I sat next to you, or if you sat next to me, I probably had snacks. And if you were hungry, I had
Mm-hmm.
snacks. So I learned very quickly, and what I will now call social currency, I found a way that I could get people to like me. I found a way that I could get people near me to not necessarily connect with me, because I still didn't really develop any lasting connections with many of these people, but it got people to me. It got people to look upon me favorably. It got people to be nice to me because I had the snacks. And I really didn't understand that until I was older. When I was looking back, when I was trying to understand myself, um, I started doing autism walks because I started to identify with, a very problematic company, or organization that we do not talk very much about, that is called Autism Speaks. That is a very problematic organization. But I started to do these autism walks, and my mom actually started to come up to my college to do these walks with me. um, and it was very much of me trying to own my identity, and trying to, and my family being very supportive. And my mom has always been very supportive, but her, driving all the way up, 3.5 hours to come for the weekend, to do this walk with me, because it was really important to me. And it's very rare that, you have, especially if you're not a white male, that you have a supportive family that will do that and help you own your identity. But it was these little things that, where I started to see that, like, you know, when I got to high school, when I started to really own who I was, then I started wearing pajamas to school, because I wanted to be comfortable and not restricted, and, fighting myself the whole day. Like, I couldn't stand jeans. I can't stand socks with seams. I couldn't stand shirts with tags. There were so many things that I just chalked up to my ADHD, which
Mhm.
there's a lot of carryover, so it makes sense. But um, I felt free when I wore pajama pants. I did it in college too, and people, might have looked at me differently, but I needed to look at myself, and I needed to say, how could I build a comfortable life for me?
Yeah.
Because the problem is, and something that I use in therapy is ACT, and ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy, and we really look at the ways in which we thought feelings of defectiveness through overcompensation and through social withdrawal and drug use and eating disorders and disordered eating, and so many ways that we've covered up the anxiety and depression that we feel about our own feelings of not being good enough that come with neurodivergence. Um, that I needed to own myself. I needed to own who I was, who I wanted to be. you know I color matched. I wore red pajamas and a red shirt and a red hat. I mean, things that you would not associate with being a typical way of dressing. I wanted to completely be a color because it felt comfortable. I wanted to, and I would have had people that were like, "Why are you wearing that?" And I was like, because I want to be read today. I want to. This feels fluid to me. This feels I'm all one color. I'm comfortable. Might maybe one day I wear all green. I wear green pajamas and a green shirt, and I loved that because it just felt so comfortable. And to where I was starting to really say that, like, I'm not going to be defined by society. A lot of things I tell my neurodivergent clients is that I don't want you to anymore fit yourself into an environment that is built for you by society. I want you to build the environment that you want to live in. I want you, because we so often try to fit ourselves into a box that is not built for us. And why do that? Why torture yourself like that, right? When you could be living more freely. And anxiety keeps us from doing that. Anxiety of social, you know, you know, from being a social pariah, or being, looked at as that weird kid. When we're fighting ourselves the whole time, and we're just suffering. We're really suffering. And when it comes to being autistic, it's really painful, almost physically painful, to fit yourself into a world that is not built for you. Um, and when you start to, I went to a big college. I joined a fraternity. I tried to fit into, I really tried to throw myself into as much as I could to fit in. That and you sit there, you try to go down at parties and be in the loud environment where everybody's drinking, and there's drinks slopping here, and there's liquids, and there's noise, and it's painful. And you fight it with drug use, and you fight it with marijuana, and fight it with anything you can just to fit in. And I started to wear pajamas to those parties. I started to, and certainly people would be like, "We don't need you to come down for these parties." And I would be like, "If I'm gonna come down, I'm gonna be myself." I wore pajamas to a Christmas party. I wore somebody. It was a Secret Santa, and one of the brothers got me a onesie. It was like a Hello Kitty onesie. Because I wore it to formal, because here is the thing, is that, like, I need, and I even brought one of my friends as a date to this formal, and we just had the best time, because um I was being myself, and there were a good number of people in that room who supported me being myself, and being quirky, and being odd or weird, or whatever way they wanted to define it. I was me. And for the first time, for some of the first times in life, that felt really good.
Mm.
It felt good to be myself, and to not be afraid to be myself.
Mm.
And that really changed, getting into the space of being a therapist, because I went on from there. I worked in different support schools. I worked in a non speaking school. I worked in a lot of schools in New Jersey before I moved out to California for, to get my master's in social work, whereby even then, you know, being part of this community that is, the neurodiversity affirmative group and the neurodivergent community, um, has really helped inform the work that I do,
Mm.
because I've started to own who I am as to be the work that I want to help others identify as and be able to own themselves and not settle for life being painful. And too often, as neurotypical society says, is that's just how life is. And that's just what we have to put up with because life is painful. And like, why is that accepted? Why
Yeah.
is it accepted that life should be painful? I mean, certainly life has its ups and downs, and parts of life will always be painful. Grief and loss and change, especially for neurodivergence, change is painful. Um, but why should we settle for the parts of life that we do have control over? Why should we settle for those being painful when who are we? Who are we living for? Are we living for ourselves then, or are we living for what our parents or our friends or the people that we hold close to us expect from us that we quite don't understand? Um, and I urge you to break out of that shell of expectation that is slowly killing you and learn that it is okay to be whoever your body needs itself to be. It is okay to live comfortably in the clothes that you want to live comfortably in. It is okay to take a job that pleases you, you know, visually, that is scanning data that you're like, well, people want me to like talk to people and they want me to be in this client facing job and I just can't do it. And well, then why are you suffering? Why are you putting yourself through that? Because you can be owning your needs, which again is something that everybody can benefit from therapy for, is owning your needs. But when we talk about the neurodivergent community, we talk about the pain of living that comes with not being able to identify our needs and own our needs. And that's when we start to talk about how self-diagnosis, coming back to the whole theme of this, the purpose why we're here today is that learning who you are is a lifelong process that for many comes very late. And I don't want to say too late because it's never too late, but I urge you that as a teen and young adult, if you have never had the chance to be diagnosed with ADHD or autism, or you didn't feel like you quite fit in, or you felt like the ways that you adapted, maybe you found ways to fit in, but you still don't understand what is the point of small talk and what is the purpose of talking about things you don't enjoy. Like, listening to some, because I started to find, recently I came across something called Bumble BFF, which is actually a place where you can make friends and you can literally put exactly what you're looking for. I love movies and I love snacks. I only want to find new friends who are really interested in movies and really love finding new foods, because, or finding the best cookie in LA, like that
Yeah.
is something that I get so passionate about that I love. And why would I spend my time trying to fit in with a different crowd when I can spend all my time around people who love the same things as I do? And that's some of, also, and in the clients that, that we've, that you find and that send to me, or that, that we talk about, is that, people that are just looking to fit in the world that they enjoy and never quite understanding how to find that,
Yeah.
or how to surround themselves with a community that feels good and really feels like themselves. Um, so self-diagnosis is such an important piece that, because most people, the majority, 80 to 90% of people, will never be able to, either find or have the resources or means to secure a formal diagnosis. If you can, more power to you. Please do it if it really helps you. But I will say that no test can tell you who you are.
Mm.
you know what if the test told you that you're not, and you still don't have closure, you still don't feel like you fit in? So I urge you that, especially a lot of the people that do diagnoses out there don't know what they're looking at.
Yep.
Non-neurodiversity affirmative therapists and neurodiversity affirmative psychologists will look at you and will still not see you. And it's really sad that we will stop there and say, well, they said I wasn't autistic, I guess I'm just not. I just will never understand myself. And And I urge you, do not stop there, because you know that something else is different. You know that you're different. And I don't see your differences as symptoms. I see them as you. I see them as the ways that you define yourself and see yourself, and the ways that make you so, you know, unique, and special, in the idea that we are all unique and special, and the ways that make us so, people like passionate people. If you're passionate about certain things, people love that. I love when I meet people who are passionate about different things. Do you own you? I love to surround myself with people who are passionate, because it gives me such a sense of my own identity, that, like, this is why I love myself in that way, because I have certain interests, and if you do too, that's powerful. People, it's hard, you may not find yourself as interested or interesting if you're not owning those pieces of yourself, because that's what sets you apart. That's what brings you also to your community. That's what will help you inform how you look for and find your community. Um, and, be you. Love those things. Find other people who love those things. Go on Bumble BFF. Find swipe left and right to find the people who you're going to love talking to, because they share the same kind of gaming interests, or any kinds of things, or planes, or radios, or specific genres of music that are very obscure. Just all I want you to do is be you and love yourself for that, because there's nothing more powerful than loving yourself, and it first begins with accepting yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Andrew, to your point, you know, there needs to be safe spaces for that. And I think
Yeah.
that's where therapy, and I do want to be careful, because you're right. You do want to see a therapist that is affirming. Um,
Right.
because a lot of us as neurotypical therapists, um, if we haven't done our due diligence in understanding the perspectives and hearing the voices of the neurodivergent community, then we miss it, right? Because we inherently have come from a place of ableism. I mean, it's just it's its own ism, and I think as therapists, we're always challenged to think about our inherent biases, and that is we don't typically think about neurological functioning as a bias, and so how do we do
Yeah.
that? And that's like a whole nother episode. But I think here you are. What I love so much is, one, just sharing your own journey. And I'm hoping that this empowers anybody out there where if this resonates with you, continue to dig. Like, don't
Yes.
stop,
Yes.
and that I love, there's just a few things that I love that you said. One is, no test can tell you who you are. And I will
Yeah.
tell people out there that the way in which we diagnose autism today is still very limited. And it does not also acknowledge the gender differences in autism,
Yes. Yes.
and that females, autistic females, have different profiles than autistic males. And this is something that we actually tend to see. And we used to say, oh, like autism is like 6-to-1 males to females, 7-to-1 males to females. And it's like, it's really not. It's because how how
We just, yeah,
it's
we don't
expressed
see it.
differently.
We're
Yeah.
not seeing it.
Yeah. So, I think for anyone out there, this idea of find a safe space to explore, find the places where you feel most comfortable, create your habitats of comfort. And I know, like, just myself, I mean, I come from a generation of hustle, right? So it's like, comfort, what do you mean comfort? Like, just work, work,
Right.
work, and if you haven't worked hard enough, then that's why you haven't reached your goals, or whatever that is. And it just doesn't work that way. I think for this community, it's like, get comfortable and only go to your edges of comfort or outside your comfort zones for specific reasons that you've chosen. That is like, but in order to do that, you have to know yourself. So how do you find those
Right.
spaces of self-exploration? To which I will say, I will leave Andrew's website in the description.
Yeah.
But Andrew, just really quick, share your website or the best ways to get a hold of you if someone's interested in getting a hold of you.
Yeah. My website is andrewbruckertherapist.com. My email address is andrewbruckermsw@gmail.com. Please reach out to me. Whether you want to talk about self-diagnosis or you want to talk about finding somebody who's neurodivergent affirmative that can do a formal diagnosis, I have plenty of resources. Um, you know, Please, there are Facebook groups, autism inclusivity, autistic connections. Facebook is really great for also finding either your special interest groups or autistic groups to ask questions and find yourself. But yeah, I mean, I just want more people to know. I want more people to ask questions.
Yeah.
And if you're fighting against yourself on this, the internalized ableism that we inherently grow up with about feeling that we're never quite living up to something that we're supposed to live up to. Um, you know, it keeps you from searching. It keeps you from looking. And I want you to look. I want you to dig. I want you to find it because when you
Yeah.
find it, your eyes will open and you will see yourself for possibly the first time.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful.
Yes, it's so empowering. And that's the kind of the I think that's what therapy is about in my mind, right? It's empowerment. It is how do I understand myself and where do I want to be and how am I empowered um in a way where I'm like I can trust myself to get there and I can trust in myself to do
Yeah.
these things. I'm not saying do it on your own. Obviously, you can reach out for help, but
Yeah.
inherently that you know who you are and that you've accepted that. That's like
It
the very
starts with
first
you.
place.
It
Yeah, and
starts
so
with you.
yeah,
And
that's where I think therapy, is that safe space to do that with, but not all therapists. So, like, let's just be
yeah,
really careful with that because therapists can also do harm inadvertently when they're not
very
when they're
much
not affirming.
invalidate.
So let's
Yeah.
just like we'll
Yep.
just be careful there, Andrew. Thank you so much for just your energy and your passion for this space and for being there and for coming on the show today. I'm
Yeah.
so
I,
appreciative for you.
I will give one last shout out to
Yeah.
ndtherapist.com and neurodiversity affirmative therapist group on Facebook. Very helpful groups. Finding a therapist. ND Therapist has a directory for each state. Not every state has a neurodivergent affirmative therapist that you can easily locate. Try there. Try the Facebook group. I am so happy to be here today. Thank you so much, Gwen, for allowing me to come on your show and talk about something that's really important to me.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it.